The clatter of silverware on porcelain was the sound of money at the gilded compass, a sound 24-year-old Lavinia Whitmore knew intimately. It was the sound of deals being signed, of fortunes being made, of a world that existed light years from her own. But in the cold, damp alley behind the restaurant, surrounded by the ghosts of discarded Michelin star meals, the only sound was the stifled sob of a young woman pleading with fate. She was whispering into a cheap, cracked smartphone, her words a desperate prayer swallowed by the city's uncaring hum. She had no idea that just 10 feet away in the shadows stood Adrian Davenport, a man whose net worth was greater than the GDP of a small country, and he was listening to every single word. The air in the gilded compass was thick with the scent of truffle oil and ambition. Lavinia Whitmore moved through it like a ghost, her movements economical and precise. She refilled water glasses crafted from Venetian crystal-cleared plates that had held morsels of food costing more than her weekly rent, and offered a practiced, weary smile to patrons who rarely met her eyes. Her uniform, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, was a suit of armor. It hid the frayed edges of her nerves and the bone-deep exhaustion of working 2 jobs to keep her family afloat. Tonight, Table 7 was her Everest. It was occupied by a single man, radiating an aura of such intense, still power that it seemed to bend the light around him. Lavinia knew the type. She'd seen them before, but this one was different. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He was quiet, his gaze sharp and assessing, as he negotiated a deal across the table with 2 other men in tailored suits. His name, she'd learned from the reservation, was Adrian Davenport. A quick, forbidden search on her phone in the staff room had revealed he was a titan of industry, a private equity magnate, known as the Vulture in financial circles for his ruthless takeovers. He looked the part, chiseled features that seemed carved from granite, silver-streaked hair, and eyes the color of a winter storm. Lavinia's focus was shattered when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A single, vibrating pulse. The emergency signal from her mother, Maria. Cold dread washed over her. It could only be about one person. "Excuse me," she whispered to her manager, Hector, her voice tightened. "I need 5 minutes. Family emergency." Hector, a man whose compassion had long been eroded by the demands of fine dining, sighed. "Make it 2 Whitmore. Davenport's table is about to need clearing." Lavinia didn't wait for a reply. She slipped out the back service door into the grimy alley. The sudden chill was a shock against her flushed skin. She pulled out her phone, her thumb trembling as she answered. "Mama, what is it? Is it Nico?" Her mother's voice was a choked, frantic whisper. "Lavinia, it's his breathing again. The doctors, they said the last round of chemo didn't work. It's not shrinking, the tumors." Lavinia's knees felt weak, and she leaned against the cold brick wall, the rough surface digging into her back. "What are they saying? What's the plan?" "There is no plan, my love," Maria sobbed. "Not a standard one. They said his body is too weak for another aggressive round. They mentioned something. An experimental trial. The sarcoma link gene mutation program at Northbridge Medical." A flicker of hope ignited in Lavinia's chest, only to be immediately doused by the harsh reality of their life. "A trial. That's good, right? That's a chance." "It's a chance that costs a fortune," Maria's voice cracked. "It's not fully covered. We need to pay for the initial genetic sequencing and the specialized care. They said the preliminary cost. Lavinia, they said it's $500,000. The number hung in the air, monstrous and obscene. $500,000. It might as well have been 500 billion. It was a sum so astronomical, it felt like a joke. Lavinia thought of the $100 in tips folded in her pocket, the result of 10 hours of grueling work. It was a drop in an endless, merciless ocean. Tears she hadn't realized were forming began to stream down her cheeks. She sank down onto an overturned milk crate, her polished black work shoes scraping against the greasy pavement. She heard the faint sound of her little brother, Nico, coughing in the background of the call. Then his weak voice. "Is that Lavinia?" Maria passed the phone. "Nico, baby, I'm here," Lavinia said, forcing her voice to be steady bright. "They said the medicine isn't working." The 12-year-old's voice wavered, thin and reedy. "Am I going to die, Lavinia?" The question hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. This brilliant, funny boy who loved astrophysics and could name every constellation who dreamed of being an astronaut was asking his older sister if his life was over. "No," Lavinia said the word, a fierce, desperate promise. "No, you are not. Do you hear me, Nico? You are a fighter. We are all fighters. We will figure this out. I will figure this out. I will get the money. I don't care how. I'll sell a kidney. I'll work 3 jobs, 4 jobs. I will get you into that trial. You just have to promise me you'll keep fighting. Promise me." "I promise," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm scared." "I know," she murmured, closing her eyes, picturing his pale face and the dark circles under his eyes. "Being scared is okay. But we don't give up. Whitmores never give up. Now you rest. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Love you too," he replied. She ended the call and finally let go, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. The universe felt cruel and capricious. Inside, men spent thousands on a single bottle of wine. Outside, her brother's life had a price tag she could never hope to meet. She buried her face in her hands, unaware that the service door had creaked open. Adrian Davenport had felt suffocated by the obsequious chatter of his business partners. The deal was done, but the victory felt hollow, as it often did. He stepped into the alley for a blast of cold air to clear his head, and he froze. He saw the waitress from his table, her proud shoulders now slumped in defeat, her body trembling. He heard everything. The name of the disease, the hospital, the impossible sum of money, and when she spoke to her brother, her voice, infused with a strength that belied her tears, something inside Adrian, something long dormant and encased in ice, cracked. He wasn't thinking about profit margins or hostile takeovers. He was thinking of another hospital room, another child's frightened voice, another promise he had been powerless to keep. He was thinking of his daughter Lily, who had been stolen from him by a rare cancer 6 years ago. He watched the young woman Lavinia pull herself together. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hands, took a deep, shuddering breath, and squared her shoulders. She was putting the armor back on, ready to walk back into the lion's den and smile as if her world wasn't collapsing. It was in that moment that Adrian Davenport made a decision. It was illogical, reckless, and went against every calculated instinct he had honed over a lifetime. He was going to intervene. But this wouldn't be a simple act of charity. He had learned long ago that money thrown at a problem was often wasted. No, this would be an investment in hope, and he would manage it with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything else. Lavinia stood up, brushing non-existent dust from her apron. She had to get back inside before Hector fired her. Losing this job now was not an option. As she turned toward the door, a figure stepped out of the deep shadows. She gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. It was him, the man from Table 7, Adrian Davenport. His face was impassive, his stormy eyes fixed on her. She immediately felt a surge of panic. He had heard her. He was going to complain to her manager. She was going to be fired for taking a personal call, for crying in the alley like a child. "I'm so sorry, sir," she began, her voice hoarse. It was an emergency. I'll be right back inside. Your table, the sarcoma link gene mutation," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the alley's silence. It wasn't a question. At Northbridge Medical, the trial is run by a doctor, Genevieve Reed. Lavinia stared at him, bewildered. How could he possibly know that? How did you? "I have a passing familiarity with her work," he said, sidestepping the question of his eavesdropping. He took a step closer, and Lavinia instinctively took a step back. He wasn't threatening, but his presence was overwhelming. "Your brother's name is Nico." "Please," she whispered, her professional composure completely gone. "Don't tell my manager. I need this job." A flicker of something, not pity, but perhaps understanding, crossed his features. "Your job is the least of your concerns. $500,000. That's the entry fee for Dr. Reed's trial." Lavinia flinched, as if he'd struck her. Hearing the number from this stranger's lips made it feel even more real, more insurmountable. I'll get it," she said, the defiant words from her phone call sounding hollow and absurd now. Adrian Davenport simply watched her for a long moment, his gaze so intense it felt like he was performing an audit of her soul. He was assessing her, weighing her the same way he would a company on the verge of acquisition. "Pride is a luxury, Miss Whitmore," he said finally. "Desperation is a motivator. You have an abundance of both. It's a potent combination." He reached into the inner pocket of his immaculate suit jacket and pulled out a slim platinum card case. He extracted a single card and held it out to her. It was heavy, embossed with his name and a single phone number. No company logo, just his personal line. "My assistant Geneva will call Northbridge Medical in the morning," he stated, not offered. "She will arrange for the costs of your brother's entry into the trial to be covered in full. She will also arrange transportation for you and your family to the hospital tomorrow at 9 a.m. for his preliminary assessment." Lavinia stared at the card, then at his face, searching for the punchline. This had to be a cruel joke, a rich man's twisted form of entertainment. Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I don't need to know you," he replied, his tone clipped and all business. "I know the situation. I consider this a venture, an investment in a particular outcome, and I protect my investments." His words were cold, transactional, yet they described an act of impossible generosity. Lavinia's mind was reeling, unable to reconcile the two. She didn't take the card. "There's a catch," she said, her voice filled with suspicion. "There's always a catch." "There are conditions," he corrected her. "Condition 1, I am kept apprised of every single development. I will have access to his medical team. I am not an anonymous benefactor. I am a stakeholder. Condition 2, you and your family will focus solely on Nico's recovery. That means you will quit this job, and your mother will quit hers effective immediately. My foundation will provide a stipend to cover your living expenses for the duration of the treatment." Lavinia's jaw dropped. Quit her job. A living stipend. This was insane. It was a dream, and she was terrified she was about to wake up. "We can't accept that. It's too much." "I'm not asking you to accept," Adrian said, his patience wearing thin. "I'm telling you the terms of the investment. My terms are not negotiable. The goal is to give your brother the best possible chance of survival. Stress about finances and working exhausting hours are detrimental to that goal. They are inefficiencies I intend to eliminate." He saw the war in her eyes, the desperate hope fighting against a lifetime of cynical caution. He pushed the card into her hand, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. His skin was cold. "Be ready at 9 a.m., he said. "A black town car will be outside your apartment building. Geneva will have your address from the restaurant's employee file." And with that, he turned and walked back into the restaurant, leaving Lavinia standing alone in the alley, the cold, heavy card feeling like a brand in her palm. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She looked at the card, then at the closed door. Was this man an angel or a devil? She ran home through the dark streets, the adrenaline singing in her veins. She burst into their small, cramped apartment to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "Mama," Lavinia said, breathless. Maria looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Any news? Did you think of something?" Lavinia knelt before her mother and took her hands. She explained the entire surreal encounter, the man in the suit, the overheard conversation, the unbelievable offer. As she spoke, Maria's expression shifted from grief to disbelief, then to a fragile, terrified hope. "Lavinia, this can't be real," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "People like that, they don't exist. He knew things, Mama. He knew the name of the trial. He knew the doctor's name." Lavinia held up the business card as proof. It was stark and real in the dim light of their kitchen. Adrian Davenport. That night, neither of them slept. They sat by Nico's bedside, watching his shallow breathing caught between the hope of a miracle and the fear of a terrible deception. Lavinia clutched the card in her hand, feeling like she was holding a key to a world she couldn't comprehend, a world where $500,000 was an inefficiency to be eliminated. She had no idea that by accepting Adrian Davenport's help, she wasn't just saving her brother's life. She was stepping onto a battlefield, and the war had already begun. At precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, a gleaming black Lincoln Navigator, so long it seemed to take up half their narrow street, purred to a stop in front of their aging apartment building. Neighbors peered out of windows, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. For the Whitmore family, it felt like a spaceship had landed. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was the polar opposite of Lavinia, tall, impeccably dressed in a grey pantsuit, with her hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She radiated an almost robotic efficiency. "Miss Whitmore, I'm Geneva, Mr. Davenport's executive assistant," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "We should be on our way. Dr. Reed is expecting Nico at Northbridge in 45 minutes. The whirlwind had begun. Geneva handled everything with a quiet, terrifying competence. She spoke to the building's super about their broken elevator, her tone suggesting it was a personal affront to Mr. Davenport. She coordinated with the driver, reviewed a schedule on a tablet, and ushered a bewildered Maria and a weak but wide-eyed Nico into the plush leather interior of the car. The journey to Northbridge Medical was a study in contrasts. They glided through the city streets they usually navigated on crowded buses, the sounds of traffic muted to a distant hum. Nico, who hadn't been outside for weeks, pressed his face to the tinted window, marveling at the world speeding by. Northbridge was less a hospital and more a futuristic medical campus. As they pulled up to the private wing, Dr. Genevieve Reed was waiting for them. She was a woman in her late 40s with intelligent, piercing eyes behind stylish glasses. There was an air of academic brilliance and a no-nonsense demeanor about her. "Mrs. Whitmore Lavinia," she said, shaking their hands firmly. "And you must be Nico. I've read your file. You're a strong young man." She then turned her attention to Geneva. "The funding from the Davenport Foundation was wired this morning. We can begin the preliminary genetic work immediately." As Nico was whisked away by a team of nurses for his initial tests, Dr. Reed led Lavinia and Maria to a private consultation room. "I need to be very clear," Dr. Reed began, her tone serious. This trial is on the cutting edge. It's high risk, high reward. There are no guarantees. Mr. Davenport's funding gives Nico access, but it doesn't buy a miracle." She looked pointedly at them. "And his level of personal involvement is highly unusual. I answer to a board of medical ethics, not to his balance sheet. Nico's well-being is my only priority." Lavinia felt a chill. Dr. Reed wasn't hostile, but she was drawing a line in the sand. Adrian Davenport's world was already colliding with theirs, creating friction and uncertainty. Over the next few days, the collision became more pronounced. Adrian, true to his word, was a stakeholder. He didn't visit the hospital, but his presence was a constant, invisible force. The finest specialists were consulted. Nico was moved to a private suite with a view of the city skyline. Gourmet meals replaced standard hospital fare. It was the best of everything, a level of care so far beyond their reality, it felt like they were living in a movie. But it was also disorienting. Lavinia had quit her job as instructed, leaving a stunned Hector in her wake. The first stipend payment appeared in her bank account, a sum that made her gasp. Yet she felt a profound sense of uselessness. Her role as a provider and fighter had been usurped. Now all she could do was wait, watch, and worry. A week into Nico's stay, Adrian summoned her. Not to the hospital, but to his penthouse apartment. The address Geneva sent was for a sleek glass skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The private elevator opened directly into his home. The apartment was breathtaking and profoundly empty. It was a cavern of glass, steel, and minimalist art with panoramic views of the city below. It was less a home than a monument to success, and it was achingly lonely. Adrian was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, dressed in casual grey slacks and a black cashmere sweater. He looked different here, in his own space, less like a predator and more like a king in a self-imposed exile. "Lavinia," he said, turning to face her. "Thank you for coming. How is he?" "He's starting the first phase of the gene therapy tomorrow," she said, feeling small and out of place amidst the sterile luxury. "He's nervous. We all are." "Dr. Reed is the best in her field," Adrian stated. "Nervousness is an acceptable emotional response. Giving up is not." He gestured to a large, ornate telescope positioned by the window. "Your brother likes astronomy, I'm told." Lavinia was startled. "Yes, he loves it. He wants to be an astronaut." "A worthy ambition," Adrian said, his gaze distant. He walked over to a small refrigerated unit and pulled out 2 bottles of water. My daughter also loved the stars. Her name was Lily. It was the first time he had offered a piece of himself a crack in his granite facade. Lavinia felt the air shift between them. "She used to make me bring this telescope out onto the balcony," he continued, his voice softer, now laced with a pain that was clearly still raw. "She had a map of the constellations. She could name every one. She was brilliant." He paused, composing himself. "She was diagnosed with neuroblastoma when she was 11. We fought for 2 years. The best doctors, the best hospitals in the world. Money was no object. But it didn't matter." The silence that followed was heavy, with shared grief, a bridge of understanding forming between 2 people from impossibly different worlds. Lavinia finally understood. This wasn't just about an investment for him. This was a ghost story. He was trying to save Nico, but he was also trying to rewrite the ending of his own tragedy. He started visiting the hospital after that. Not every day, but often. He wouldn't stay long. He'd bring books for Nico on quantum physics and black holes. They would talk not about being sick, but about the cosmos. Adrian would listen intently as Nico explained the life cycle of a star. And for a few moments, the boy in the hospital bed wasn't a patient, but a teacher. And the billionaire wasn't a benefactor, but a student. In those moments, Lavinia saw Adrian Davenport thaw. She saw the man beneath the armor, a father mourning his child. He developed a quiet, gruff affection for Nico, and Nico in return began to hero worship the powerful man who spoke to him like an equal. But as this fragile bond formed, shadows were gathering on the horizon. The world of corporate warfare that Adrian inhabited was not content to leave him to his private mission, and Dr. Reed's warning about his involvement being unusual was about to prove prophetic. The battle for Nico's life was not only being fought in his bloodstream against mutated cells, but in boardrooms and laboratories he knew nothing about. The first sign of trouble came not as a thunderclap, but as a subtle shift in the atmosphere at Northbridge. Dr. Reed, usually focused and accessible, became distracted and tense. Meetings were postponed. Nurses whispered in the hallways. One afternoon, Lavinia found the doctor staring at a tablet in her office, her expression grim. "Dr. Reed, is everything all right with Nico's results?" Dr. Reed looked up, startled. "Oh, Lavinia. No, Nico is responding as expected for this early stage. It's something else. An external pressure." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. The biotech firm that developed this gene-editing technology, Ethelred Therapeutics, is the subject of a hostile takeover bid. The name meant nothing to Lavinia, but the doctor's tone was alarming. What does that mean for the trial? "It means uncertainty," Dr. Reed said, rubbing her temples. "The company bidding for them is Omnigen, a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate. They're not interested in boutique high-risk therapies for rare diseases. They're interested in Ethelred's profitable patents for mass-market drugs. If they succeed, they could defund or shut down this program entirely. They see it as a financial drain." Lavinia felt a familiar, sickening dread. Just when they had a lifeline, a corporate monster was threatening to sever it. Can they do that? Just stop it? "They can try," Dr. Reed said. "They're already putting pressure on the hospital board, questioning the trial's viability, its cost-effectiveness. It's a war of attrition." That evening, Lavinia relayed the news to Adrian during one of his visits. She expected him to be angry to make a call and fix it. Instead, a look of cold, hard recognition settled on his face. He became utterly still. "Omnigen," he said the name like poison on his tongue. "Of course. It's him." "Him who?" Lavinia asked. "Leland Munro." Adrian answered, his eyes turning to chips of ice. "He's the CEO of Omnigen. We have a history. He sees business as a zero-sum game. For him to win, someone else has to lose completely and utterly." The abstract corporate threat now had a name and a face. Lavinia looked up Leland Munro on her phone. He was younger than Adrian, with a slick, predatory smile. His company was infamous for buying smaller labs, stripping their assets, and discarding anything that didn't promise a massive short-term profit. The corporate battle escalated with frightening speed. Anonymous articles began appearing in financial news outlets, casting doubt on the efficacy of Dr. Reed's research and hinting at ethical corners being cut, a clear smear campaign orchestrated by Omnigen. The hospital's board of directors grew nervous. Then the second blow fell. Nico had a bad reaction. One night, his fever spiked dangerously, and he struggled to breathe. The wing went into lockdown as the medical team swarmed his room. Lavinia and Maria could only watch in terror through the glass, feeling utterly helpless. Nico stabilized after a few harrowing hours, but the incident spooked everyone. Dr. Reed was forced to pause the gene therapy infusions. In the aftermath, she confronted Adrian in the hallway, her professional composure cracking for the first time. "This is what I was afraid of, Mr. Davenport." This corporate warfare is creating a pressure cooker. My team is being harassed by Monroe's lawyers. The board is breathing down my neck. This stress affects the integrity of the trial. The patient needs a calm, stable environment, not to be the centerpiece in a grudge match between two billionaires. Adrian's face was a mask of controlled fury, but his voice was dangerously quiet. You think I want this? Dr. Monroe is not just attacking your trial. He's attacking me through this boy. He was right. This wasn't just business. It was personal. Monroe had found Adrian's one point of vulnerability, his emotional investment in Nico. The attack was strategic, cruel, and brutally effective. Hope, which had blossomed so brightly, began to waver. The stipend still arrived in Lavinia's bank account, but the money felt tainted now, like a retainer for a battle she hadn't signed up for. She saw the toll it was taking on her mother, whose brief respite from worry was replaced by a new, more complex terror. Adrian, however, seemed to draw strength from the fight. The ruthless vulture that the financial world feared was reawakened, but this time his focus was not on profit, but on protection. He assembled a team of his own lawyers, PR experts, financial analysts, and set up a war room in his office downtown. He allowed Lavinia inside this inner sanctum one day. The walls were covered in whiteboards, filled with complex diagrams, stock market analyses, and legal strategies. Men and women with intense eyes spoke in a rapid-fire language of injunctions, proxy votes, and market manipulation. Monroe is trying to force a shareholder vote at Ethelred to approve the sale, Adrian explained to her, pointing at a chart. He's trying to devalue the company by discrediting its most promising research, your brother's trial. We're fighting back. We're buying up Ethelred stock to block the vote, and we're launching our own media campaign to highlight the life-saving potential of the work. Lavinia felt like she was in a foreign country without a translator. But she understood one thing. Adrian Davenport was going to war for her family. He was leveraging his entire empire, not just to save one boy, but to destroy the man who was using that boy as a pawn. The stakes were now impossibly high. Nico's health was fragile, the trial was paused, and a corporate titan was doing everything in his power to ensure it never resumed. Lavinia realized with a terrifying clarity that Adrian's intervention had not removed them from danger. It had placed them at the very heart of a hurricane. The war against Leland Monroe raged on a brutal high-stakes chess match played out in press releases and stock market fluctuations. Adrian's team worked around the clock, fighting Monroe's every move. But Monroe was a master of corporate sabotage, and the pressure on Northbridge and Ethelred Therapeutics was relentless. During this period of intense conflict, Adrian's resolve only hardened. His researchers were tasked with digging into every aspect of Omnigen's history, searching for any weakness, any past transgression they could leverage. One night, a junior analyst named Ben, fueled by caffeine and a relentless work ethic, found something. It was buried deep in the archives of a biotech firm Omnigen had acquired and dismantled a decade earlier. Geneva patched Ben through to Adrian's secure line. Lavinia was in the war room, having taken it upon herself to bring coffee and food to the exhausted team, feeling it was the only tangible contribution she could make. "Mr. Davenport, you need to see this." Ben's voice crackled with excitement. The acquisition of Viridyne Labs in 2015. Monroe personally oversaw the process. They had a research project codenamed Project Chimera. "Get to the point, Ben," Adrian said, his voice tight with impatience. Project Chimera was a novel cellular therapy targeting aggressive pediatric cancers, specifically a rare variant of neuroblastoma. The preliminary data was incredibly promising, sir. A potential breakthrough. But Omnigen acquired Viridyne, and Monroe shut the project down. He buried it. The air in the room went still. Adrian stood frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the conference table. Why would he shut it down? The internal memos are clear, Ben said, his voice dropping. The projected market was too small, only a few hundred cases a year worldwide. The memo signed by Monroe himself states the R&D costs were too high for a therapy with limited profit potential. He shelved it and fast-tracked a new male baldness drug instead. A wave of nausea washed over Lavinia. Neuroblastoma. It was the same cancer that had taken Adrian's daughter. She looked at Adrian and saw not a billionaire, but a devastated father, hit by a second phantom blow. The sterile professional atmosphere of the war room dissolved, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. He didn't speak. He simply walked out of the room, past the stunned analysts and lawyers, and into his private office, closing the door behind him. Lavinia waited for a few minutes, then hesitantly knocked. There was no answer. She pushed the door open to find him standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city. "Mr. Davenport," she said softly. "Adrian." He turned, and for the first time, she saw him completely stripped of his armor. His face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated grief and rage. The calculated coldness was gone, replaced by a fire that seemed to burn from the depths of his soul. 6 years ago, he began, his voice raspy with emotion. I sat in a room with Lily's doctors. They told me they had run out of options. I begged them. I told them I would fund any research fly, any expert in, from anywhere in the world. I would have burned my entire fortune for one more chance, for a sliver of hope. He paced the room, his movements agitated, a caged animal. And all that time, a man I knew, a man I'd competed against for years, was sitting on a potential cure. He had it in his hands, a breakthrough, and he let it die. He traded my daughter's life and the lives of children like her for a hair loss treatment. The raw agony in his voice was devastating. This fight was no longer about Nico. It wasn't about business or revenge or even pride. It was about a fundamental injustice that had robbed him of his only child. Leland Monroe hadn't just been a business rival. He had, through his greed, been an architect of Adrian's greatest pain. Lavinia felt tears welling in her own eyes, not just for him, but for the profound, tragic connection that now bound their families together. His past tragedy and their present crisis were two sides of the same cruel coin. She walked over to him, her earlier feelings of intimidation completely gone. In this moment, they were not a billionaire and a waitress. They were two people united by a shared fight against a darkness that put a price on human life. "We're going to beat him," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. "This isn't just your fight anymore. He threatened my brother. He played a part in what happened to Lily. He's not just going to lose a business deal, Adrian. We're going to expose him for what he is. For Lily. And for Nico." Adrian stopped pacing and looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not a project or an investment, but an ally. He saw the same fierce, protective fire in her eyes that he felt in his own gut. Her family's plight had given his old cold grief a new and urgent purpose. He had been fighting a ghost for 6 years, but now that ghost had a name and a face, and Lavinia and her family had given him a reason to finally win the war. "Yes," he said, his voice regaining its steel but tempered with a new warmth. "Yes, we are." The discovery of Project Chimera changed the entire strategy. It was no longer a defensive battle to protect the trial. It became an all-out offensive to expose Omnigen's morally bankrupt history. Adrian's PR team began working with investigative journalists, feeding them the damning internal memos. The story was no longer about a hostile takeover. It was about corporate greed at its most depraved. As the first articles began to surface, creating ripples of scandal around Omnigen, Lavinia felt a shift in her own role. She was no longer a passive bystander. She became the human face of the story, giving a carefully worded interview to a trusted journalist about Nico's fight and the importance of Ethelred's research. She spoke with a quiet dignity and fierce love that resonated far more than any corporate statement. Their bond, forged in an alley and solidified by grief, had become a powerful weapon. They were a strange and formidable team, the vulture of Wall Street and the waitress from Queens, united in a quest for justice that would shake the foundations of a corporate empire. The exposé on Omnigen and Project Chimera hit the financial world like a lightning strike. Leland Monroe, once lauded as a visionary CEO, was now facing a firestorm of public outrage and shareholder panic. The narrative had been flipped. He was no longer the aggressor in a smart business deal. He was the villain who chose profits over sick children. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. Monroe, facing ruin, retaliated with a final, desperate gambit. He couldn't win in the court of public opinion, so he would scorch the earth. He focused all his remaining influence on the one place he could still do damage: Northbridge Medical's board of directors. He called in favors threatened to pull other streams of funding and manufactured a crisis. An emergency board meeting was called to decide the ultimate fate of Dr. Reed's trial. The official agenda cited concerns over patient safety, referencing Nico's recent setback and the reputational risk to the hospital from the ongoing corporate battle. It was a thinly veiled attempt to force the board's hand and kill the program once and for all. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. They had less than 48 hours. Adrian's war room was buzzing with a frantic, focused energy. "He's trying to get the trial shut down before our story reaches critical mass," one of his lawyers said. "If the board cancels it, his narrative that the research was unviable gets a huge boost. It's his only way out." Simultaneously, something was wrong at the hospital. Dr. Reed's team was trying to restart Nico's treatment, but his latest blood panels were coming back with bizarre, contradictory results. The data suggested the gene therapy was suddenly having a toxic effect, validating the very safety concerns Monroe was pushing. Dr. Reed was beside herself. "It makes no sense," she told Lavinia and Adrian in a hushed, panicked conference call. "The markers are all over the place. It's as if the samples are being contaminated or the data is being manipulated." A sudden, terrifying thought struck Adrian. "It's not the samples, Doctor. It's the data. Monroe has someone on the inside." It was a classic corporate espionage tactic. The betrayal was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Adrian's security team, working with the hospital's IT department, launched an immediate and discreet digital forensic investigation. They had to find the mole before the board meeting. The race against time was agonizing. Lavinia stayed at the hospital, a fierce guardian at Nico's bedside, watching every nurse, every technician her trust in the institution shaken. Adrian locked himself in his office, directing the hunt, his voice a low, commanding hum over a dozen phone lines. With only hours to go before the meeting, they found him. It was a junior lab technician, a young man named Philip, with crippling student debt. Omnigen had found his weakness and offered him a sum of money that felt like a fortune. He had been subtly altering the digital readouts from Nico's blood work, inputting false data that would trigger safety alerts and make the treatment look like it was failing. The proof was a series of encrypted messages and offshore bank transfers. It was undeniable. The board meeting was already underway when Adrian, flanked by his legal team, and a grim-faced doctor, Reed strode into the conference room. Lavinia was there too, having refused to be left behind. She stood at the back, her presence a silent testament to what was at stake. Leland Monroe was there, attending via a large video screen, his expression smug and confident. He had just finished a sanctimonious speech about OmniGen's commitment to patient safety and ethical research. Which is why, with a heavy heart, we must recommend that the board suspend this trial indefinitely until these serious safety concerns, validated by the patient's own data, can be addressed. Monroe concluded. The board members, a group of cautious, risk-averse administrators and physicians, looked somber. They were ready to vote. "Before you do," Adrian's voice cut through the room like a shard of glass, "I believe you're missing some crucial data." He nodded to his aide, who connected a laptop to the room's projector. The first thing on the screen was Philip the lab tech's signed, notarized confession. The second was the record of the wire transfers from a shell corporation linked to OmniGen. The third was a side-by-side comparison of the real blood panel results, which showed Nico was actually beginning to respond positively to the therapy and the falsified data the board had been given. The room erupted in gasped whispers. The board members stared at the screen, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. On the video monitor, the color drained from Leland Monroe's face. His smugness evaporated, replaced by the panicked look of a man watching his world crumble. Adrian stepped forward, his eyes locked on Monroe's pixelated image. "You didn't just try to kill a research program, Leland. You actively sabotaged a child's medical treatment. You falsified data that could have led this board to deny him life-saving care. All to cover up your dirty secrets and close a deal." He then turned to the board. "The only reputational risk to this hospital was your willingness to be manipulated by a man who buried a potential cure for cancer a decade ago because it wasn't profitable enough." He gestured to Lavinia. "This woman and her family have endured more than any of you can imagine. Her brother isn't a data point. He's a child who is fighting for his life, and you are about to sacrifice him on the altar of corporate greed. Now you will vote." It wasn't a vote. It was a rout. The motion to suspend the trial was unanimously rejected. A new motion was passed to open a full investigation into OmniGen's interference and to offer Dr. Reed the hospital's unequivocal long-term support. On the screen, Leland Monroe's feed went black. The battle was over. Lavinia rushed to Adrian's side, her eyes shining with tears of relief and gratitude. He looked at her, and the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. The vulture had taken flight not to destroy but to protect. And he had won. In the sterile boardroom, amidst the wreckage of a corporate titan's ambition, a small family's hope had been saved. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and decisive. The scandal surrounding OmniGen exploded into a full-blown corporate catastrophe. Leland Monroe was fired by his board, and the company faced a barrage of federal investigations and shareholder lawsuits. The hostile takeover of Ethelred Therapeutics collapsed completely. But for the Whitmore family, the real victory was quieter and far more profound. With the external pressures gone and the correct data restored, Dr. Reed was able to confidently resume Nico's treatment. The gene therapy, once unhindered, began to work its quiet miracle. Week by week, scans showed the tumors shrinking. The light returned to Nico's eyes, the color to his cheeks. His laughter, once weak and strained, began to echo in the halls of the hospital wing again. Adrian was a constant, steady presence throughout the recovery. The dynamic had changed. He was no longer just a benefactor. He was family. He would sit with Maria for hours, drinking coffee and listening to her stories about their life before the illness. He attended Nico's physical therapy sessions, offering gruff encouragement that made the boy push himself harder. He and Lavinia formed an easy, unspoken partnership, a team built on mutual respect and a shared harrowing experience. The day Nico was declared to be in remission was a day of quiet, tearful joy. He walked out of Northbridge Medical on his own, 2 feet, squinting in the bright sunlight, a future he almost didn't have stretching out before him. A few weeks later, Adrian called Lavinia to his office. The war room had been dismantled, the whiteboards wiped clean. "The Davenport Foundation is undergoing a restructuring," he announced, his tone formal, but his eyes warm. "I'm establishing a new permanent division, the Lily and Nico Fund. Its sole mandate will be to finance promising high-risk research into rare pediatric diseases, the kind of unprofitable ventures Omnigen would discard. I've asked Dr. Reed to chair its scientific advisory board." Lavinia was speechless, deeply moved by the gesture. "Adrian, that's wonderful." "I'm not finished," he said. "A fund like this needs more than just money and scientists. It needs a heart. It needs someone who understands what the families are going through, someone who can fight for them, guide them through the fear and the bureaucracy. It needs a director of patient advocacy." He slid a formal offer letter across the polished desk. "I believe you are the most qualified person I know for the job." Lavinia looked at the letter, her name, and the job title printed in elegant type. It came with a generous salary benefits and the resources to help hundreds, maybe thousands of families just like hers. It was a chance, not just to have a job, but to have a purpose, to turn her family's pain into a source of strength for others. It was the furthest thing from waitressing at the Gilded Compass she could possibly imagine. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course." 6 months later, Lavinia stood on a vibrant green soccer field, a crisp autumn breeze blowing through her hair. She wore a stylish blazer, looking every bit the confident executive. A few yards away, Nico, now with a full head of hair, expertly dribbled a soccer ball around a group of cheering friends. He was healthy, strong, and full of life. Her mother Maria sat on a nearby bench, a serene, happy smile on her face, knitting a scarf. At the edge of the field, Adrian Davenport stood beside Lavinia. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet contentment. He watched Nico, and the smile that touched his face was genuine and full of warmth. "He's got a good left foot," Adrian commented, his voice relaxed. "He gets that from his father," Lavinia said softly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the boy who connected them. Adrian hadn't replaced the daughter he had lost, but in saving Nico, he had found a way to honor Lily's memory. He had channeled his grief and power not into acquiring things, but into giving hope. Lavinia's phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Reed about a new candidate for the fund, a little girl in another city with a rare condition. A new fight was beginning. Lavinia glanced at Adrian, who gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. She typed a quick reply, her fingers moving with confidence. She was no longer a waitress serving a world she couldn't afford. She was a warrior, an advocate, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. A whispered conversation in a cold alley had led to this beautiful ordinary afternoon. It had saved her brother, redeemed a billionaire, and changed her family's destiny forever, proving that sometimes the greatest investments have nothing to do with money at all. The story of Lavinia, Nico, and Adrian is a powerful reminder that our lives can intersect in the most unexpected ways. It shows us that behind every face there is a story of struggle, of love, and of quiet desperation. A single moment of listening, a single act of compassion, even one that starts from a place of pain, can set in motion a chain of events that transforms not just one life, but many. It's a testament to the idea that true wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by the impact you have on others. Their journey shows that when we choose to fight for one another, we can overcome even the most formidable of shadows. If this story of compassion, resilience, and unexpected connection touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need a story of hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.